Oh. Welcome to my presentation. So this is my dissertation topic. My name is Amira Farag. The topic is Understanding Marital Intimacy Among Newlywed Muslim Americans and the Role of Sexual Health Education. What is missing and where do we go from there? So currently there's about 3.45 million Muslims in the United States. Approximately 44% of them are between the ages of 18 and 29. These are, and this population is continuing to grow in the United States. And sex for us as Muslims is a very taboo topic currently. It wasn't always this way. It used to be a very openly discussed conversation. It had a certain ethical code around it in terms of how it's discussed, but it was discussed openly and without shame. And unfortunately, because of the impacts of colonization and the Victorians on the region, we've taken on a more stigmatized approach, or a Victorian approach, to how we discuss sex and sexuality. And it's now basically become associated that the erotic self and the sexual self, or the erotic self and the spiritual self, cannot coexist, which Islam does not view. And in previous literature, I found that as a result of the increased stigma around this conversation, there has been a lack of information amongst Muslims. And the current state of sexual health education in the United States is not great. It's not required in all 50 states to get sexual health education, and it's not required in all 50 states that any sexual health education provided is medically accurate. So about 13 states do not require that their sex education curricula is medically accurate. And so what we so put as a whole, the population as a whole is now at a disadvantage because of the state of sexual health education in the country. Now take into account the other layer of Muslims being a marginalized population, and the most comprehensive of sexual health education out there currently clashes with Islamic values in many ways. And so this puts this population in a really risky situation, because yes, Islam does not allow sex before marriage. However, Muslims are still sexually active. And the Muslims who are sexually active, due to lack of information, research has found some are engaging in very risky sexual behaviors. And a lot of the research focused a lot on what happens before marriage, on Muslims who are sexually active, or the lack of information and the stigma. But what no one's really talking about what happens now that, you know, people are having sex for the first time, or how they navigate that first sexual experience, and what that does for the individual. And so I wanted to do a study, or a qualitative study, where I interviewed Muslims who were recently married, who identify as American, who grew up in the American culture, and really understand what it was like to navigate that experience for the first time, and what role does sexual health education play. And so I used Mustaka's approach to the study, where I asked them about the phenomenon itself. What was it like to navigate this relationship for the first time, and really understand that textural experience that they have. But then I wanted to go a layer further and understand the structural essence of that phenomenon. How did we get here? What was the role that sexual health education played? Is there something that is missing? And the second piece to this study is, where do we go from here? Do you want other Muslims who are going to navigate this chapter to go through what you went through, or do you want them to go through something different? And so I interviewed 8 Muslims, Muslim Americans, who were recently married. They were between the ages of 18 and 35, straight, cisgender. And they grew up either born or raised majority of their life in the United States, married no earlier than 2016. So almost all my participants were married for 5 years or less. And the results showed that the way you navigate that experience really does depend on how sex was discussed growing up. And so I broke down the phenomenon into 4 stages. So the structural essence being, what were the sources of knowledge that individuals received? And how was that information and how was that knowledge communicated to them? And based on how that was communicated, we saw how that manifested and showed up in the relationship. So individuals who had sex openly discussed and had an open communication around sexual health education, whether it's through parents or their schools or peers or teachers, whatever it may be, they were able to, those who had that open discussion felt an increased amount of knowledge and understanding, and an increased sense of self-awareness into what they need in order to feel comfortable and safe, and uh, how to enjoy their relationship. And that showed up in how that manifested in the relationship was an increased sense of comfort, communicating with their partners, and a sense of preparedness. Now this is, having sex for the first time with anyone can be awkward, it can be messy, but it can be uncomfortable. But individuals who had that open discussion felt more comfort navigating the uncomfortable. Unfortunately, for individuals who did not have sex openly discussed, if it was latent with stigma and only pushed on abstinence, we saw a lot of shame around people's sexuality. We saw this idea of sex being a bigger deal than it really was, or a smokescreen effect, where it's kind of like, what is behind this forbidden curtain, and what is going on, and why can't what happens if I access it? A lot of nerves and anxiety and fear around the topic and around sex itself rose, and there was difficulty seeking out information. And now how that manifested in the relationship for those individuals was a sense of isolation, inadequacy, dissonance, and difficulty navigating things like understanding consent, and knowing how to communicate with their partners around those struggles. So fortunately, all these participants that I had very supportive partners, and they were able to communicate about those things openly. However, it took a lot of time to get there, and a lot of discomfort along the way, and we saw a lot of anxiety and distress throughout the process. And so when I asked these individuals, how do you want to move forward? How do you want future generations to experience this phenomenon? They all discussed having a sexual health education curricula for Muslims specifically. And the entire umbrella of that curricula should be destigmatized. And that would involve age appropriate curricula, that you meet people where they are, you don't pathologize their experiences, you normalize their questions and where they're coming from, and provide adequate access to resources. And within that destigmatized approach, you can discuss physical health, you can discuss emotional health, and you can also discuss things within an Islamic framework. So understanding the philosophy of the religion around sex and sexuality, understanding it's an act of worship, it's something that is celebrated, it's not something that is shameful, but there are times and places in which these things can be explored, and understanding why it is that we believe what we believe, so that you have a curricula that is informative from a mental health and a physical medical perspective, but also includes that spiritual framework. Now the results of this kind of show a shared experience amongst Muslims throughout the globe. But I mean, I was fortunate enough to speak with Muslims who were comfortable enough to have these conversations with me. There are people out there who are experiencing and navigating these conversations and navigating the chapter in their lives, who are probably experiencing things in more severe manifestations. So I found a Muslim therapist who talked about couples she works with, Muslim couples, and how some of her clients have traumatic responses to sex because they don't realize that it's something that they can enjoy. There are a lot of women that experience vaginismus as a result of sexual shame. And so this study kind of starts the groundwork for that, where we can start to discuss how to kind of bridge the erotic self and the spiritual self in a way, and integrate those two parts of the self that is free of shame and allows a person to exist in a way that is in accordance with their law, with their religious values, and also in a way that, in a way that really aligns with their religious values. Because yes, there is a clash between Islamic values and the current curricula, but what we're seeing now is a clash between the tenets of Islam and the actual experience of these participants, of Muslims who are trying to navigate this chapter. This is not the spirit of the religion. And so this study can really help kind of pave the way for having these conversations and creating a program that educates Muslims on sex and sexuality in a way that is culturally and religiously sound, and also kind of bridge some of those gaps for this population that has been marginalized. You can use this in couples counseling, you can use this in sex therapy with Muslim clients. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a great tool for psychoeducation, and it's coming from the perspective of the target population. So that's what I have for you. I really appreciate you listening to my little my research, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Yeah.